Your shop?
It is. Is there a problem, officer?
Where are you from?
I live in Astoria. The shop's been here 3 years.
That's not what I asked. Where are you from originally?
I was born in Baltimore. I'm a U.S. citizen. Is there something specific I can help you with?
We're conducting routine checks, reports of employers hiring undocumented
I
workers.
run this shop mostly by myself. I have one part-time employee. She's
I'll
a US
decide what
citizen.
I'm welcome to see.
Dale Pritchett had been an ICE enforcement agent for 8 years, and on the morning of November 8, 2024, he walked into Martinez Electronics on Roosevelt Avenue in Queens with his partner and made the worst decision of his career when he saw a black shop owner and immediately assumed criminal activity. He accused the man of employing illegal immigrants, demanded access to his back room without a warrant, and when the owner calmly refused and started recording the interaction, Pritchett put him in handcuffs for obstruction of a federal investigation that didn't actually exist. What Pritchett didn't know was that the man he just arrested was CYA Operations Officer Cassius, that the shop was operational cover for a classified mission, and that Pritchett had just created an intelligence breach that would end with him facing federal charges and prison time. You're not going to believe where this one goes. Hit that like button and subscribe to Cops Cam Archives right now, because this story is about to get wild. Martinez Electronics sat at 8217 Roosevelt Avenue in Jackson Heights, Queens, wedged between a Colombian bakery and a cell phone repair shop in a neighborhood where you could hear a dozen languages spoken on any given block. The storefront had a green awning that needed replacing, security bars on the windows, and a neon open sign that flickered slightly but stayed lit. Inside, the shop was organized and clean. Shelves lined the walls, displaying laptops, tablets, cameras, and accessories. A glass counter near the front held smaller items like chargers, memory cards, and headphones. The back wall had a door marked "Employees Only" that led to a storage area and office. Cassius had owned the shop for 3 years. He was 39 years old, 6 feet tall, with close cropped hair and the kind of build that suggested he spent time staying in shape, but wasn't trying to look intimidating. On this particular Friday morning, he wore dark jeans, a gray Henley shirt, and work boots. To anyone walking past or coming in to buy something, he looked exactly like what his business license said he was, the owner of a small electronics retailer in a diverse working-class neighborhood. What that business license didn't say was that Cassius had been a CIA operations officer for 14 years, that he'd run assets in 3 different countries before this assignment, and that Martinez Electronics was carefully constructed cover for an intelligence operation targeting a network suspected of moving money and equipment to foreign actors through businesses in Queens. The shop was real, the merchandise was real, the sales were real, but certain customers who came in weren't really there to buy electronics, and certain transactions that looked normal on the surface were being monitored and recorded by people who worked in buildings Cassius would never talk about. At 10:23 a.m., Cassius was helping a regular customer named Dimitri pick out a laptop for his daughter when the door opened and 2 men in dark tactical pants and ice windbreakers walked in. One was white, maybe 45 years old, with a buzz cut and the build of someone who'd played football in high school and still lifted weights. His name tag read Pritchett. The other was younger, early 30s, thinner, with brown hair and nervous energy. His tag said Finch. They both had badges clipped to their belts and weapons visible on their hips. Cassius looked up from the laptop he was showing Dimitri and immediately read the room. The way they walked in wasn't casual. The way Pritchett's eyes swept the shop wasn't curiosity. This wasn't 2 agents stopping in to buy something. This was 2 agents who decided something was wrong here before they even opened the door. "Good morning," Cassius said evenly, closing the laptop. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" Pritchett walked up to the counter, his partner hanging back near the door. "This your shop?" "It is," Cassius said. "Is there a problem?" "You the owner?" Pritchett asked, ignoring the question. "Yes. My name's on the business license right there on the wall, if you want to verify." Cassius gestured to the framed documents displayed behind the counter. Business license, sales tax permit, all the required paperwork for operating a retail business in New York. Pritchett barely glanced at them. "Where are you from?" Cassius kept his expression neutral. "I live in Astoria. The shop's been here 3 years." "That's not what I asked," Pritchett said. "Where are you from originally?" Dimitri, the customer, had gone quiet, stepping back slightly from the counter. He'd lived in this neighborhood long enough to recognize when ICE showed up, and he knew what usually happened next. I was born in Baltimore, Cassius said calmly. I'm a U.S. citizen. Is there something specific I can help you with? Pritchett's jaw tightened slightly. We're conducting routine checks on businesses in this area. We've had reports of employers hiring undocumented workers. I run this shop mostly by myself, Cassius said. I have one part-time employee who works weekends. She's a college student, U.S. citizen. Everything's documented and legal. You're welcome to see the paperwork. I'll decide what I'm welcome to see, Pritchett said. He looked around the shop again, his eyes moving over Dimitri, then to the back door. How many people you got working in the back? Nobody's in the back, Cassius said. It's storage and an office. Just me here right now. Mind if we take a look? Cassius met his eyes. Actually, yes, I do mind. Unless you have a warrant, this is private property, and I'm not consenting to a search. The temperature in the room dropped. Finch, the younger agent near the door, shifted his weight and put his hand near his radio. Pritchett's expression went from suspicious to something harder. You refusing to cooperate with a federal investigation? Pritchett asked, his voice dropping lower. There's no investigation, Cassius said, keeping his tone respectful but firm. You walked into my shop and started asking questions without explaining what this is about. I've answered your questions. I've offered to show you documentation, but I'm not letting you search my property without a warrant. That's my constitutional right. Pritchett took a step closer to the counter. Let me tell you what I think is happening here. I think you're running something out of this shop that you don't want us to see. I think you've got people in the back, or you're hiring illegals, or you're moving something through here that's not legal. And when people start talking about their rights and refusing to cooperate, that tells me I'm onto something. Cassius pulled his phone out of his pocket, slowly, keeping his movements visible and unthreatening. I'm going to record this conversation. That's also my right. Put the phone down, Pritchett said immediately. No, Cassius said calmly, already starting their recording. You're federal agents in my place of business making accusations without basis. I'm documenting this interaction. Finch moved away from the door, coming closer. Sir, put the phone down right now. Dimitri had backed all the way to the wall, his eyes wide. He'd seen this before, seen how quickly these situations could turn violent, and he wanted no part of it. Gentlemen, Cassius said, his voice still controlled and even, I'm a business owner operating a legal retail establishment. I've committed no crime. I've violated no law. You have no warrant and no probable cause to search this property. If you want to verify my status or my employee's status, I can provide documentation, but I'm not consenting to a search, and I'm recording this interaction for my protection. Pritchett's face had gone red. You're obstructing a federal investigation. What investigation? Cassius asked. You haven't identified any investigation. You haven't shown me any warrant or subpoena. You've made vague accusations with no evidence. That's when Pritchett decided he'd had enough. He moved around the counter quickly, reaching for Cassius's phone. Give me the phone now. Cassius stepped back, keeping the phone out of reach. Don't touch me or my property. You're under arrest, Pritchett said, pulling handcuffs from his belt. Obstruction of a federal officer, interfering with an investigation, refusal to comply with lawful orders. None of those orders were lawful, Cassius said, but he wasn't resisting. He knew exactly how this played out if he fought back. Instead, he let Pritchett grab his arm and spin him around, let him push him forward against the counter while Finch came over to help. The handcuffs went on. Pritchett was rough about it, tightening them more than necessary. Dimitri was pressed against the wall, his hands up, clearly terrified he was going to be next. The phone clattered to the floor, still recording. You want to play games? Pritchett said in Cassius's ear. Fine, we'll do this downtown. We'll verify your status the hard way, and we're going to search every inch of this place while we're at it. Cassius didn't say anything. He just let them cuff him, let them walk him toward the door. His face was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came from training, from experience in situations far more dangerous than this. But Pritchett didn't notice that. He just saw a black shop owner who'd refused to comply and was now going to learn what happened when you didn't respect federal authority. Before we go further, What city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe that no badge gives anyone the right to violate your constitutional rights, then hit that like and subscribe button and join the Cops Cam Archives family. Pritchett walked Cassius out of the shop with Finch right behind them. The handcuffs were tight enough that Cassius could feel them cutting into his wrists, but he didn't complain. He kept his breathing steady and his expression neutral. Dimitri had already slipped out the door the moment the agents weren't looking, disappearing into the crowded Roosevelt Avenue sidewalk like he'd never been there at all. Their ICE vehicle was parked illegally in front of the shop, blocking a fire hydrant. Pritchett opened the back door and put his hand on top of Cassius's head to guide him into the seat, pushing down harder than necessary. Cassius got in without resistance. "Stay here," Pritchett said, slamming the door. Through the window, Cassius watched as both agents went back into the shop, leaving him alone in the vehicle. Inside Martinez Electronics, Pritchett and Finch started going through everything. They went behind the counter, opened drawers, looked through receipts and paperwork. Finch tried the door to the back room. It was locked. "Got a lock on the back," Finch called out. Pritchett came over and looked at the door like it was a proof of guilt. "Yeah, because he's hiding something back there." He pulled it out his radio. "This is Pritchett. I need bolt cutters at 8217 Roosevelt Avenue. We're executing a search of the premises." "Do we have a warrant for that?" Finch asked quietly. Pritchett looked at him with contempt. "We've got probable cause. Owner refused to cooperate, tried to obstruct us, fled the scene before we could get consent." "He didn't flee," Finch said. "We arrested him." "You want to write the report, or you want me to write it?" Pritchett asked, his voice hard. "Because I can write it however it needs to be written." Finch went quiet. He'd only been with ICE for 2 years, and he'd already learned that questioning Pritchett was a bad idea. The man had been doing this for almost a decade, and he had friends in the agency who protected him when complaints came in. Finch had seen it happen before with other people Pritchett had arrested. The reports always matched what Pritchett said happened, even when witnesses said different. Outside in the vehicle, Cassius sat calmly in the back seat. His hands were cuffed behind him, but he wasn't struggling. He was thinking, running through protocols, calculating what came next. His phone was still on the floor of the shop, probably still recording, unless one of them had picked it up and turned it off. The shop had security cameras, but they were obvious, the kind that any retail business would have for insurance purposes. What Pritchett and Finch didn't know was that there were other cameras, hidden ones, that fed to servers that weren't in the building. And they definitely didn't know that the moment Pritchett had put those handcuffs on, a silent alert had been triggered. The alert went to a number that didn't appear in any public directory. It went to an office in Northern Virginia, and the person who received it looked at the details, saw the location, saw Cassius's status, and immediately started making calls. Back in the shop, another ICE vehicle arrived with the bolt cutters. Pritchett took them and cut through the lock on the back room door. He pushed it open and walked in with Finch behind him. The back room was exactly what Cassius had said it was. Storage, boxes of inventory, stacked neatly and labeled, a small desk with a computer, some paperwork, filing cabinets. Everything was organized and clean. There were no people hiding, no evidence of anything illegal, just a normal business storage area. Poor Pritchett started opening boxes anyway, dumping contents on the floor, looking through filing cabinets, pulling out drawers. Finch stood in the doorway watching, looking more and more uncomfortable as Pritchett tore through everything without finding anything wrong. "There's nothing here," Finch said finally. "Then he's smart about hiding it," Pritchett said, refusing to accept that he might have been wrong. He pulled out his phone and took pictures of the room, of the inventory, of the computer on the desk. "We'll take the computer, have forensics go through it." "On what basis?" Finch asked. "Suspected criminal activity," Pritchett said. He unplugged the computer and picked it up. "This is evidence." "Evidence of what? We didn't find anything." Pritchett turned on him. "You want to keep questioning me, or you want to do your job? We've got a suspect in custody who obstructed a federal investigation. We've got a business in a high immigrant area with a locked back room and a bunch of electronics that could be going anywhere. That's enough." Finch didn't respond. He just followed Pritchett out of the back room, watching as his partner carried the computer out of the shop like it proved something. They got back in the vehicle. Cassius was exactly where they'd left him, sitting calmly in the back seat, his eyes forward, his breathing steady. "We're taking you in for processing," Pritchett said, starting the engine, "and we're seizing evidence from your shop." "That computer is private property," Cassius said quietly. "You had no warrant to take it." "I had probable cause," Pritchett said, "and when we go through it, we're going to find out exactly what you're really doing in that shop." Cassius didn't say anything else. He just sat there as Pritchett pulled away from the curb and headed toward the ICE field office in Lower Manhattan. The whole drive took 22 minutes through Friday morning traffic. Neither agent spoke to him. Pritchett drove with one hand on the wheel, looking satisfied with himself. Finch stared out the passenger window, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. What neither of them knew was that while they were driving, the computer they'd stolen from the shop was already being tracked, and the phone calls that had started the moment Cassius was arrested had already reached people who were now very, very interested in what ICE agents Dale Pritchett and Garrett Finch had just done. They pulled into the ICE field office garage at 26 Federal Plaza in Lower Manhattan at 11:14 a.m. Pritchett parked in his assigned spot and got out, opening the back door to pull Cassius from the vehicle. They walked him through the garage entrance, through security, and into a processing area where suspects were normally fingerprinted, photographed, and booked before being moved to detention facilities. Cassius was placed in a holding room, still handcuffed, and left alone while Pritchett went to start the paperwork. The room was small, concrete walls, a metal bench, a camera in the corner recording everything. Cassius sat down and waited. Finch stayed in the hallway outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He didn't feel good about any of this. They'd arrested a guy for refusing an illegal search, taken his property without a warrant, and now Pritchett was writing up a report that Finch knew was going to be full of exaggerations and outright lies. But speaking up meant going against Pritchett, and that meant making an enemy who had the power to destroy his career. Pritchett was at his desk filling out the arrest forms when his supervisor, a unit chief named Morrison, walked over. "What have you got?" Morrison asked. "Picked up a shop owner in Queens," Pritchett said. "Refused to cooperate with a lawful search, obstructed our investigation, had a locked back room he wouldn't let us access. Brought him in for processing." Morrison looked at the paperwork. "You have a warrant for the search?" "Didn't need one," Pritchett said. "Probable cause. He was acting suspicious, refused consent, tried to interfere." Morrison frowned. "Acting suspicious isn't probable cause, Dale." "He had a locked back room in a business in an immigrant neighborhood," Pritchett said. "That's enough." Before Morrison could respond, his phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and his expression changed. "Hold on." He answered it, stepping away from Pritchett's desk. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. When Morrison came back, his face had gone completely white. "Release him," Morrison said quietly. "What?" Pritchett looked up from his paperwork. "Release him right now. Take the cuffs off. Give him back everything you took from him. Do it immediately." "Why?" Pritchett stood up. "We just brought him in. I haven't even finished the—" "I don't care," Morrison said, and his voice had gone hard in a way Pritchett had never heard before. "You need to uncuff that man and release him right now, and then you need to come to my office." Pritchett stared at him. "Who was on the phone?" Morrison didn't answer. He just turned and walked toward his office, his shoulders tight. Pritchett went to the holding room, confused and angry. He opened the door. Cassius was sitting exactly where they'd left him, hands still cuffed behind his back, expression still calm. Too calm. "You're being released," Pritchett said flatly, moving behind Cassius to unlock the handcuffs. "On what grounds?" Cassius asked, and there was something in his voice now, something that hadn't been there before. "Don't push it," Pritchett muttered, removing the cuffs. "You're free to go." Cassius stood up and rubbed his wrist where the metal had left deep red marks. "I want my property back. The computer you took from my shop. It's evidence." "It's stolen property," Cassius said, his voice going colder. "You had no warrant. You had no probable cause. You broke into my storage room and took my computer illegally. I want it back. Now. Pritchett's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He went to the evidence locker, retrieved the computer, and brought it back. Cassius took it without a word. That's when the elevator doors opened and 3 people stepped out. 2 men and 1 woman, all in dark suits, all moving with the kind of purpose that made everyone in the office stop and look. The woman in front had short dark hair and an ID badge clipped to her belt that said something Pritchett couldn't read from where he stood. She walked straight to Morrison's office. The door closed. Through the glass walls, Pritchett could see Morrison's face going from white to gray as she spoke to him. Then Morrison came out and pointed directly at Pritchett. "My office, now!" Pritchett walked into the office. The woman was standing there with her arms crossed. One of the men handed Morrison a folder. Morrison opened it, looked at the first page, and then looked at Pritchett like he'd just discovered he'd been working with a bomb. "Do you know who you arrested this morning?" Morrison asked, his voice barely controlled. "Some shop owner in Queens who was—" "His name is Cassius," the woman interrupted. "He's a CIA operations officer. That shop is operational cover for a classified intelligence operation. And you just compromised it." The room went completely silent. Pritchett's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked at the folder Morrison was holding, then at the woman, then at Cassius, who was now standing in the doorway of the office, watching this conversation with an expression that was absolutely freezing. "You arrested a federal intelligence officer," Morrison said slowly, like he was trying to make himself believe the words. "You searched his operational cover without authorization. You seized classified equipment. You created a security breach in an active mission." The woman stepped forward. "Agent Pritchett, you're done. Not suspended. Done. We're filing federal charges, and every single thing you did this morning is going in a report that's going to be read by people way above your pay grade." Pritchett looked at Cassius. "You should have told me." "I shouldn't have to tell you anything," Cassius said, and his voice was absolutely arctic. "I'm a U.S. citizen. I own a legal business. You had no right to harass me, no right to search my property, and no right to arrest me. And now you're going to spend the rest of your life learning what happens when you let racism guide your decisions instead of the law." Dale Pritchett was escorted out of the ICE field office within the hour. His badge and weapon were confiscated. His credentials were deactivated. He was told to go home and wait for further instructions, which was federal government language for, "You're fired, but the paperwork takes time." Garrett Finch received a formal reprimand and was transferred to a desk job processing paperwork in Newark, his field career effectively over before it had really begun. But the consequences didn't stop at termination. The CIA doesn't take kindly to its operations being compromised, and it takes even less kindly to its officers being assaulted and illegally detained. Within 72 hours, a formal complaint had been filed with the Department of Justice by CYA General Counsel. The complaint detailed every single action Pritchett and Finch had taken: the racial profiling, the illegal search, the unlawful arrest, the theft of classified equipment disguised as a business computer, and the potential exposure of an intelligence operation that had cost taxpayers millions of dollars and 3 years of careful work to establish. The DOJ opened a criminal investigation immediately. Federal prosecutors reviewed the security camera footage from the shop, which showed everything. They listened to the audio recording from Cassius's phone that had captured the entire interaction. They interviewed Dimitri, the customer who'd witnessed the beginning of the confrontation. They reviewed Pritchett's history and found a pattern: 15 complaints over 8 years from business owners in immigrant neighborhoods, 13 of whom were people of color, all alleging harassment and illegal searches, all quietly buried by supervisors who hadn't wanted to deal with the paperwork. Pritchett was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, illegal search and seizure, theft of federal property, and obstruction of a federal intelligence operation. Finch was charged as an accessory for his role in the illegal search and for failing to stop Pritchett despite knowing what was happening was wrong. The trial took place 6 months later in federal court in Manhattan. The prosecution's case was straightforward and devastating. They had video, they had audio, they had witness testimony, and they had Cassius himself, who took the stand in a closed session and calmly explained exactly what Pritchett's actions had compromised, what intelligence had potentially been lost, and what the cost to national security might be. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They found Pritchett guilty on all counts. Finch was found guilty of the lesser charges as accessory and failure to intervene. Pritchett was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Finch received 18 months and 2 years probation. But the criminal case was only part of it. Cassius filed a civil rights lawsuit seeking $8 million in damages. The lawsuit named Pritchett personally, Finch, and ICE as an institution for failing to properly train and supervise its agents. The case never went to trial. The government settled for $6.2 million 3 months after the criminal verdict, paid by taxpayers because 2 agents couldn't see past their own racism. ICE was forced to implement mandatory retraining on constitutional rights, racial profiling, and the limits of their authority. They created new oversight mechanisms for searches and arrests. They reviewed every case Pritchett had ever worked and found 7 other instances where charges needed to be dropped because his actions had violated people's rights. Cassius returned to his shop 2 days after the arrest. The CIA had already secured the location, swept for any potential compromise, and determined that while the operation had been disrupted, it could continue with adjustments. Martinez Electronics stayed open. Cassius stayed behind the counter. His cover held because most people in the neighborhood never knew what had really happened. They just knew that 2 ICE agents had come into a local business, harassed the owner, and ended up arrested themselves. The story spread through Jackson Heights like wildfire, a rare tale of accountability in a community that usually saw none. Dimitri came back to the shop a week later. He was nervous at first, but Cassius helped him pick out that laptop for his daughter like nothing had happened. Because for Cassius, that's exactly what his job required: blending in, staying calm, and never letting anyone see what was really happening beneath the surface. Dale Pritchett served his full 4 years in a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. He lost his pension, his benefits, and any chance of working in law enforcement again. When he was released, he was 50 years old with a felony record and a name that was permanently associated with racial profiling and compromising national security. He worked at a warehouse in Ohio for $9 an hour, loading trucks and trying not to think about the fact that his entire life had been destroyed because he saw a black man in a shop and couldn't imagine that man belonged there. The computer Pritchett had stolen and then been forced to return contained files that, if accessed by the wrong people, could have exposed intelligence sources in 3 countries. The fact that it had been in an ICE evidence locker for several hours before being recovered created a security review that took months to resolve and cost additional resources to ensure nothing had been compromised. Cassius kept the photo that Morrison had shown Pritchett in that office. It was his official CIA identification, the one that proved exactly who he was and exactly how badly Pritchett had miscalculated. He never displayed it. It stayed in a drawer in his actual office in Virginia, a reminder that some people see a uniform and a badge as permission to abuse power, and that sometimes the person they're abusing has more power than they could ever imagine. The shop on Roosevelt Avenue is still there, still selling electronics, still part of something bigger that the people walking past it will never know about. And Cassius is still there too, doing both of his jobs with the same quiet competence he's always had, secure in the knowledge that the system, however slowly, had actually worked this time. If this story proved to you that accountability is possible when people refuse to back down, share it with someone who needs to see it. No one is above the law, not even the people who are supposed to enforce it. Subscribe to Cops Cam Archives and make sure you never miss a story where justice actually wins.